This is not just a story about a hospital. It is a reckoning with memory, fragile, painful, and necessary. The ones locked behind these walls were not nameless. They were not faceless. They were not less. They were people, forgotten only because someone decided forgetting them was easier than facing what went wrong. Troubling circumstances surrounding how to preserve the history and the memories surrounding this place continue to perplex. Recently, we released a full-length documentary under the title of An Apparatus for Lunacy, A History of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. This feature was produced with the great cooperation and assistance of renowned and highly respected historian and author Titus Swan. Titus is the foremost authority figure concerning the history of the people who once lived within these walls. Despite accolades from the general public, our work came under fire, so to speak, for reasons that seemed to defy logic and called into question the proper methods of preserving the true stories that continue to haunt this place to this day. In response, this addendum to our documentary has been produced to cover additional information that the general public should have knowledge of. It is not meant to hurt. It is not meant as an insult, and certainly isn't meant to hurt the bottom line of those who wish to produce their own version of history or guard it as their own. History does not belong to one voice. It belongs to us all. To many, including residents of Weston, this is not a tourist attraction. It is a graveyard of memory. To others, it is simply a building, changed like anything else. But the truth is not in the walls, it is in the lives that passed through them, and they are still waiting to be heard. We begin in Ward F, the location where Dean Matheny died on September 17, 1987. He was beaten by 2 other patients, left to die in the very place designed to contain violence. For years, rumors swirled about the seclusion rooms. Who had keys? Who could open the doors? And who had the authority to intervene? But the truth was far simpler and far darker. No one was watching. When you lock a man away, you assume responsibility for his life, and when you look away, you surrender that responsibility. Dean was not a number, he was not a diagnosis, he was a man. And no institution, no matter how overwhelmed, gets to forget that. But now, they remember him, not with reverence, not with sorrow. They remember him through ticket sales. His death became a product, a backdrop, a spectacle. The room where he died is now a stop on a tour. His name is spoken, but not in mourning, in narration. His story, now sold, his suffering, now content. He died alone so others could turn a profit, some for money, others for entertainment. This was a tragedy. It should never become a business model. The death of Dean Matheny compels us to review the place where the dead came to rest. The mere discussion, however, reveals a truth that even in death, convenience sometimes outweighed compassion. And for those whose families had abandoned them, or those whose families had perished long before, there was only one resting place. 3 burial grounds, established in 1864, the early 1870s, and an undetermined date, hold over 2,340 men, women, and children. Fewer than 30 headstones remain, those who had families with means. The rest were marked only with numbered bricks. Those bricks were removed in 1979. Contract workers, unsupervised, piled them near the entrance of the hospital, and locals took them as souvenirs. Some were returned, but most were lost. Today, West Virginia State Hospital Initiative, incorporated through Project Dignity, fights to reclaim what was taken, not merely bricks, but names. Some have resisted, but Project Dignity moves forward because it must. And as that work continues, so does a muted, more troubling pattern. Though these grounds are said to be restricted, certain individuals have walked them freely, not to pay respects, but to explore, to observe, and perhaps to entertain. There is a difference between reverence and access, between honoring the dead and simply passing through them. To some, these cemeteries remain sacred ground. To others, they are a curiosity. The contrast is telling. No signage is needed to know where the line falls. This is not a place for performance. It is a place for silence, for memory, and for dignity. And for those who were denied it in life, perhaps here, at last, it can begin to be returned. From the cemeteries, we next dive deep into the history surrounding what could be described as a fortress. It was meant to be impenetrable. In 1949, a 25,000 square foot addition rose from the northern edge of the hospital campus. The contract was awarded to a regional firm, still operating today, though changed by time. The foundation they poured remains one of the most imposing structures on site. Through conversations conducted by historian Titus Swan, descendants of the original crew confirmed what records could not. The scale, materials, and the intention behind this build. This wing was meant to hold what the rest of the world would not. Here they placed the men deemed too dangerous, too unstable, or too uncertain for a courtroom. Escape-proof, bulletproof, reinforced, but not untouchable. Escapes happened, but the worst part, the part that remains, was what happened when no one left at all. This is where order became force. Restraints were expected. Sedation was not medicine, it was management. One survivor said, "I asked a question. They gave me so much Haldol I couldn't lift my legs." Another remembered, "A black man was turning blue. We screamed for help. The staff just stared." Others spoke of retaliation for speaking too loudly or asking too often. I was strapped to a board for crying. They told me if I didn't shut up, they'd make sure I forgot how to walk. These aren't rumors, these are first-hand recollections, and the ones who lived through it still feel it, sometimes in silence, sometimes in nightmares. Even after the doors closed, the building did not forget. Years later, during an after-hours event hosted inside these walls, which should have been a moment of reflection turned into something else. A historian and eyewitnesses were present the night a participant stood in this very unit, raising their voice, calling out into the dark, hurling taunts and insults at whatever might be listening. The words used were not appropriate. They weren't theatrical, and they weren't harmless. They were crude, offensive, and disrespectful to the living and the dead. Everyone in that room heard it. And whether one believes in spirits or not, the reaction, the air itself, changed. Because the harm wasn't done to the building, it was done to the memory of the people who once lived here. This place doesn't need paranormal provocation to be powerful. It already speaks. All you have to do is listen. At the end of the day, the facility still exists. Stories and memories of pain and suffering, care and joy still linger within these walls. But what it stands for depends on who's telling the story. Since 2007, a new chapter has unfolded, a revival, a rebranding, a second life. The hospital has been preserved, stabilized, and adapted. The halls now echo with footsteps of visitors, not patients. Photos are taken, events are held, and souvenirs are sold. Some call it a renaissance. But the question is not whether it has come back to life. The question is, what kind of life is it now? Who benefits? Because shirts are printed with slogans that have shamed those who lived here. Because death is repackaged for entertainment. Because tragedy has become content. Because mental illness, once a reason for confinement, is now a costume. The same stigma that confined patients is now worn on t-shirts. The same pain once silenced is now retold for laughs, for gasps, and for ghost stories. And if truths are being told today that weren't before, ask where they came from. Because many of those truths came from records. From logbooks. From the cemeteries. From research conducted not for profit, but for remembrance. Some of these stories may now be included on the tours. But if they are, know this. They were not discovered there. They were recovered. Patiently, quietly, through the work of those who believed these people still mattered, even when no one was listening. So before you pose for a photo, before you laugh at the stories, before you walk these halls and call it history, please ask yourself, do I approve of this? How would I feel if they were my family? Who does this benefit? Or are these people still being used, just more politely now? This place does not owe us a spectacle, it owes them dignity. And the truth does not belong to those who sell it best, it belongs to those who carry it with care. So remember this. These were not exhibits, they were people. Their lives were not strange, they were complicated. Their pain was not entertainment, it was real. And if we dare to remember them honestly, not through ghost stories but through fact, then something good can still come from all this. Because when we listen, we say something louder than words. You are not forgotten. You are not a headline. You are not a souvenir. You mattered, and you still do.